Do not touch my daughter. The command cut through the northern corridor at 2 in the morning, sharp enough to stop every servant still moving through the castle. Grace Miller froze with one hand wrapped around the wooden handle of her mop. 20 feet away, King Adrian Vale stood beneath a row of dim wall lamps, his black coat still wet from the midnight rain, his face unreadable except for the fear he was trying to hide behind authority. Between them stood a closed bedroom door. Behind it, a child was crying. Not loudly anymore. That was what made the sound worse. Each broken breath came through the heavy oak, like someone trying to disappear without making enough noise to be noticed. Grace looked toward the door, then back at Adrian. I was not going to touch her, she said. Adrian's eyes narrowed. No one spoke to him that calmly. Not in this castle. Not when his daughter was involved. Around them, 2 attendants stood several feet back, pale and exhausted. Another caregiver had left less than 10 minutes earlier, abandoning a half-packed suitcase near the stairs after announcing she could not endure another night in the northern wing. She had been the 12th. Grace knew because the cleaning staff counted departures the way some people counted storms. The hallway still carried the scent of lavender polish and cold stone. Her mop bucket sat beside her, a thin ribbon of water slowly running toward the edge of the rug. She should have lowered her eyes. She should have apologized and returned to the servants' corridor. She needed this job. Her rent was due in 6 days. No one needed new winter boots, and the balance in her checking account had already become a number she avoided looking at. Instead, she stayed where she was. Then why are you sitting outside her room? Adrian asked. Grace glanced down at the floor. She had been sitting there before he arrived, back against the wall, her cleaning gloves folded beside her. Because she asked everyone else to leave. Adrian's jaw tightened. She does that. No, Grace said quietly. They leave before she has to ask. The corridor went still. One attendant looked at the floor. The other pretended not to hear. Adrian took one measured step closer. You know nothing about my daughter. Grace did not argue. She looked toward the door again. Maybe not. But I know what it sounds like when a child expects people to disappear. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, but only for a second. Then the crying stopped. Absolute silence filled the hallway. Grace could hear rain tapping against the tall windows and the faint ticking of an old clock somewhere below. Adrian turned toward the bedroom door. His hand moved toward the handle. Do not, Grace said. He looked at her sharply. Excuse me. She is listening. Adrian stared at her, as if the janitor holding a mop had just challenged the throne itself. Grace lowered her voice. Give her 1 minute where nobody decides what she needs. The king did not move. Neither did Grace. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. From the other side of the door came the soft scrape of something against the floor. Adrian's breathing changed. The brass handle turned slowly from inside. Everyone in the hallway froze. The door opened less than 3 inches. One pale blue eye appeared in the narrow darkness beyond it. Adrian looked at his daughter. Grace remained perfectly still. The little girl did not look at her father. She looked directly at Grace. Then, in a voice so small the corridor almost swallowed it, Evelyn whispered, You stayed. Grace felt something tighten in her chest. Adrian looked between them, stunned. Grace gave the child the smallest nod. I said I would. The door opened another inch. 12 hours earlier, Grace Miller had entered the castle through a service door that opened behind the kitchens, carrying a brown paper lunch bag in one hand and a pair of worn cleaning gloves in the other. The afternoon sky had been gray, and a cold wind followed her inside before the heavy door closed behind her. She was 34, tired in the way single mothers learn to hide, and already thinking about the note Noah had left beside the coffee maker that morning. Good luck tonight, Mom. I saved you the last blueberry muffin. She had smiled when she read it, then checked the time and realized she was already 7 minutes behind schedule. By 6 o'clock, Grace had changed into a dark gray janitorial uniform, tied her hair back, and joined the evening cleaning crew beneath the servants' staircase. Mrs. Bennett, the housekeeping supervisor, handed her a ring of keys and spoke quickly. East wing first. Main hall after dinner. Stay away from the northern floor. Grace looked at the key ring. Why? Mrs. Bennett paused. Because that is the rule. Grace had worked in enough expensive homes to recognize the difference between privacy and fear. This was fear. Still, she nodded. She needed the paycheck more than she needed an explanation. Her rent was due soon. Noah had outgrown his winter boots. and the pediatric clinic had called twice about a balance she could not yet pay. The castle did not care about any of that. It simply stretched around her in endless stone hallways, polished floors, and tall windows darkened by the coming evening. Grace worked quietly. She emptied waste baskets, wiped fingerprints from brass railings, and cleaned mud from the marble near the west entrance. Most people passed without seeing her. A man in a tailored suit stepped around her bucket without looking down. Two women in evening dresses continued their conversation, while Grace moved aside to let them pass. She was used to being invisible. Sometimes invisibility made work easier. At 8:30, while cleaning the second-floor gallery, she heard two servants whispering near a linen closet. The new caregiver will not last a week. She will not last the night. Grace kept wiping the glass display case in front of her. How many is that now? One servant asked. 12. Their footsteps disappeared down the hall. Grace did not follow. She had learned years ago that wealthy families often carried their worst pain behind their most beautiful doors. Around 10, she was sent to collect empty cups from a small sitting room near the north staircase. That was when she noticed the drawing. It had been crumpled beneath a side table, half hidden under the velvet curtain. Grace bent down and picked it up. The picture had been drawn in dark pencil. A small girl stood in the center of the page, surrounded by dozens of tall figures. None of them had eyes. Above the girl's head, heavy black lines filled the sky. Grace stared at it longer than she meant to. There was something familiar in the way the child had drawn herself so small. Noah used to do that after his father died. Always tiny figures. Always too much empty space around them. Grace smoothed the paper carefully against her knee and placed it on the table instead of throwing it away. Then, from somewhere above her, came a sound. Not a scream. A child crying behind several locked doors. Grace looked toward the forbidden staircase. Mrs. Bennet's warning returned immediately. Stay away from the northern floor. Grace lowered her eyes to the mop handle in her hand. She told herself it was not her business. She told herself she had a son waiting at home and a job she could not afford to lose. Then the crying came again, smaller this time, followed by hurried footsteps overhead. Grace stood perfectly still for 3 seconds. On the fourth, she picked up her bucket and started toward the stairs. By the time Grace reached the northern floor, the crying had stopped again. The silence there felt different from the rest of the castle, not peaceful, but watchful. The hallway lamps burned lower, their warm light barely touching the dark wood doors and long runner carpets. Grace slowed near the top of the stairs. She could hear voices ahead, one woman speaking too quickly, another whispering, and beneath both of them a small, uneven breath coming from behind a closed door. She cannot keep doing this, someone said. She is impossible. Grace stopped beside a marble table and looked toward the sound. Two attendants stood near the bedroom, both tense, both trying not to look at the door. One held a silver tray with an untouched glass of water. The other kept rubbing her hands together. She can hear us, the younger woman whispered. She always knows. The older attendant frowned. That is not possible. A voice came from behind the door. You are afraid of me. Both women froze. Grace felt the words move through the hallway like cold air. The younger attendant stepped back. I did not say anything. You did not have to, the child answered. Grace remained near the wall, unseen for the moment. The older woman straightened her uniform and tried again. Miss Evelyn, your father only wants you to come downstairs. He wants me to be normal. The attendant looked toward the floor. That is not what he said. It is what he felt. Grace's fingers tightened slightly around the mop handle. She had heard children describe fear in strange ways before, but this was different. Evelyn was not guessing. She was listening to something nobody else could hear. A moment later, another servant arrived carrying a covered plate. He barely reached the doorway before the child spoke again. You think I am going to ruin the dinner? The servant stopped. His face changed. I never said that. You thought it before you came upstairs. He set the tray down too quickly and stepped away. Grace watched all three adults exchange the same look. Not anger. Fear. That was when she understood why the drawing had no eyes. Evelyn did not need people to look at her. She felt them before they entered the room. Every nervous breath, every hidden judgment, every silent wish that she would behave differently. To everyone else, the castle was quiet. To Evelyn, it must have been unbearably loud. Grace thought of Noah after his father died, how he used to cover his ears during family gatherings even when no one was shouting. Grief had made every voice feel too close. But this child was carrying something far greater than grief. The younger attendant noticed Grace and frowned. "You are not supposed to be up here." Grace looked toward the bedroom door. "I know. Then go back downstairs." Grace should have obeyed. Instead, she asked softly, "Does she know when people are lying?" All three attendants stared at her. From behind the door came a quiet answer. "Usually." Grace almost smiled. The older attendant lowered her voice. "The king says she inherited an old sensitivity from her mother's bloodline. Emotions, intentions, fear. She feels too much of it. The stronger the emotion, the worse it becomes. And everyone who comes in here is afraid of her," Grace said. No one replied. They did not have to. Grace looked at the closed door again. For the first time, she understood what had made 12 caregivers leave. They had entered that room wanting to control Evelyn, calm her, fix her, prove they could succeed where everyone else had failed. Every one of those intentions had reached the child before their hands ever touched the doorknob. Grace set her mop bucket quietly against the wall. She was not there to prove anything. She did not want the king's approval. She did not want a reward. She did not even know if she would still have a job by morning. Behind the door, the small voice spoke again. "You are different." Grace looked at the wood between them. "How?" There was a long pause. Then Evelyn answered, "You are tired. You are worried. But you do not want anything from me." The hallway went completely still. Grace stood outside the bedroom door for several seconds after Evelyn spoke. The attendants watched her as though she had crossed some invisible line simply by answering the child honestly. Grace did not move closer. She did not reach for the handle. She only lowered herself slowly to the floor, leaving nearly 5 feet between her and the door, and rested her back against the wall. The stone felt cold through her uniform. "What are you doing?" the older attendant whispered. Grace kept her voice low. "Nothing." From behind the door came the faint scrape of movement. "Why are you sitting there?" Evelyn asked. Grace looked down at her hands. "Because standing makes people look like they are waiting for something." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, the lock clicked. The attendant stiffened. The door opened only a few inches at first. Grace remained where she was. A small hand appeared around the edge of the wood, followed by Evelyn's pale face and watchful blue eyes. She wore a long cream nightgown and held a small wooden music box against her chest. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. Grace noticed the way the child studied everyone in the hallway before looking back at her. "They are scared," Evelyn said. Grace glanced at the attendants. "Probably." The younger woman looked offended, but Grace continued. "People get scared when they do not understand something." Evelyn's fingers tightened around the music box. "Are you scared of me?" Grace thought about the question before answering. "A little." The attendants stared at her. Evelyn did too. Grace gave a small shrug. "I do not know you yet." The child stepped 1 foot into the hallway. "Then why are you still here?" Grace looked directly at her. "Because being scared is not the same as being dangerous." Evelyn went completely still. The words seemed to land somewhere deeper than Grace intended. After a moment, the child looked down at the music box. "It does not work anymore." Grace held out her hand, then stopped before extending it too far. "May I see it?" Evelyn hesitated. Grace waited. No pressure. No smile designed to persuade her. Finally, Evelyn crossed the distance slowly and placed the box on the floor between them before immediately stepping back. Grace picked it up. The carved lid showed faded silver stars. She turned the tiny key underneath. Nothing happened. "It is stuck," Evelyn said. Grace examined the hinge, then removed a small hairpin from the back of her hair. "My son breaks things faster than I can replace them." "You learn a few tricks." "You have a son?" "Noah. He is 8. Grace worked the tip of the hairpin carefully beneath the jammed metal catch. "Does he know what you are?" Evelyn asked. Grace looked up. "A janitor?" For the first time, something almost like amusement crossed the child's face. "Human." Grace returned to the music box. "He knows I am his mother. That keeps him busy enough." A tiny metallic click sounded beneath her fingers. The mechanism loosened. Grace turned the key again. A soft melody floated into the hallway, uneven at first, then clear. Evelyn's eyes widened. The attendants stopped breathing. Grace placed the music box on the floor and gently pushed it back across the 5 feet of space between them. Evelyn picked it up with both hands and listened. Her shoulders lowered. The tension in her face softened. Grace did not celebrate. She simply sat there while the melody turned slowly beneath the quiet lamps. After a while, Evelyn lowered herself to the floor across from her, exactly 5 feet away. No one spoke. The castle around them seemed to disappear into the gentle repetition of the music. Then Evelyn looked at Grace and asked, "Will you sit here until the song ends?" Grace glanced toward the clock at the far end of the corridor. Her shift was not finished. Her supervisor would be looking for her. Her paycheck depended on following rules. She looked back at the child. "Yes," she said, "until the song ends." The music box turned once more, and for the first time that night, Evelyn closed her eyes without fear. The song ended 3 minutes later, but neither Grace nor Evelyn moved. The last note faded into the corridor until only the quiet hum of the wall lamps remained. Grace looked toward the clock again. She was already behind on the West Hall, and Mrs. Bennet would notice. Still, she waited until Evelyn opened her eyes. "You said until the song ended," the girl whispered. Grace nodded. "I did." Evelyn looked down at the music box in her lap. "So you are leaving." The words were flat, but Grace heard the expectation underneath them. Not disappointment yet. Preparation. Grace stood slowly. "I have work to finish." Evelyn's face closed almost immediately. Grace reached for her mop, then paused. "That is not the same as disappearing." The girl looked up. Grace tapped the floor lightly with the wooden handle. "I will be back tomorrow night." Evelyn studied her expression with that unsettling stillness that made adults nervous. Grace did not look away. After a few seconds, the child gave a small nod and retreated into her room. The door closed, but this time it did not lock. The next evening, Grace kept her promise. She did not knock. She simply left a worn paperback outside the door while cleaning the hall. It was one of Noah's favorites, a story about a boy who built a radio from broken parts. On the cover, Grace placed a small folded note. "No questions tonight." Then she walked away. An hour later, when she returned with her cart, the book was gone. In its place sat a black chess piece. A knight. Grace picked it up and smiled before slipping it into her pocket. The night after that, she left a paper cup of hot cocoa beside the door. Not too sweet. Noah hated it too sweet, and Grace had a feeling Evelyn might be the same. She added another note. "You do not have to drink it." When Grace passed the hallway again, the cup was empty. Beside it was a tiny silver button shaped like a moon. Their conversations grew that way, through objects before words. Grace left a pencil sharpened perfectly because she had noticed the broken one in Evelyn's drawing room. Evelyn left a folded scrap of paper with a single question. "Why do humans pretend not to be afraid?" Grace answered beneath it. "For the same reason children do. They think fear makes them look weak." The next night, another question waited. "Does it?" Grace wrote back. "No. What matters is what you do while you are afraid." By the fourth night, Evelyn opened the door before Grace reached the end of the corridor. She did not step out. She simply sat on the floor inside her room with the music box beside her. Grace sat in the hallway, 5 feet away, and polished the brass baseboard while they talked. "What does Noah look like?" Evelyn asked. "Like he has never met a comb he respects." Evelyn almost smiled. "Is he afraid of you?" "Only when I say his full name." "What is it?" "Noah James Miller." Evelyn considered this. "That does sound serious." Grace laughed softly. It was the first time the attendants at the far end of the hall had ever heard Evelyn make someone laugh. Later, Grace found a drawing outside the door. 2 small figures this time. One was Evelyn. The other had curly hair and held a mop. Neither figure was surrounded by faceless people. Grace folded the drawing carefully and placed it inside her lunch bag. She did not know that someone had been watching from the shadowed end of the corridor. King Adrian stood completely still, his expression unreadable as he watched his daughter leave the door open for the janitor no one had thought important enough to notice. Adrian waited until Grace had finished the northern corridor before stepping out of the shadows. She turned at the sound of his shoes against the stone floor and immediately understood from his expression that he had seen enough to form an opinion. The folded drawing was still tucked inside her lunch bag. The small silver moon button rested in her pocket. Behind her, Evelyn's bedroom door remained open by several inches. "My office," Adrian said. Grace looked toward the door. "Now." His voice was controlled, but the coldness in it traveled farther than anger would have. Grace followed him downstairs through corridors that seemed even larger at night. The castle had gone quiet except for the distant ticking of clocks and the soft roll of her cleaning cart left behind near the stairs. Adrian's office was lined with dark bookshelves and tall windows overlooking the rain-soaked grounds. He did not sit. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. "A few nights. You entered my daughter's room without authorization. I sat outside it. You brought her personal items. A book and some cocoa." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You encouraged a private relationship with the heir to this house while hiding it from the staff responsible for her care." Grace stared at him for a moment. "I did not hide anything. You left notes." Because she was not ready for conversations. "You are a janitor." The words landed harder because of how calmly he said them. Grace lowered her eyes only long enough to take a breath. "Yes. You have no training in vampire physiology, emotional sensitivity, or royal care." "No." "Then explain why you thought you had the right to interfere." Grace looked back at him. "Because everyone else was standing outside her door talking about her like she was not inside." Adrian's expression changed. "Be careful." "I am being careful. You believe a few quiet conversations make you understand my daughter better than the people I hired to help her?" "No." Grace's voice remained steady. "I think she understands the difference between someone helping her and someone trying to manage her." The room went still. Adrian turned toward the window. Rain traced silver lines down the glass. "You do not know what she has done to this household." Grace felt something sharpen inside her, not anger, but recognition. "What has she done?" Adrian turned back. "She has driven away every specialist, every tutor, every caregiver brought here to help. Maybe they were all waiting for her to become someone easier." His eyes hardened. "That is enough." Grace knew before he said the next words. "Your employment here is terminated effective immediately." For 1 second, Noah's winter boots flashed through her mind. The unpaid clinic balance. The rent notice folded inside the kitchen drawer. Her stomach dropped, but she did not beg. She untied the small ring of service keys from her belt and placed them on Adrian's desk. "Understood." A small sound came from the doorway. Both of them turned. Evelyn stood there barefoot, the music box held tightly against her chest. Adrian's face changed at once. "Evelyn, go back to your room." "No. This does not concern you." "It does." Her eyes moved to Grace, then to the keys on the desk. "You are making her leave." Adrian stepped toward his daughter. She crossed a boundary. Evelyn backed away. Grace saw it immediately. Not fear of him exactly. Fear of what his decision meant. Another person disappearing. Another door closing. Grace picked up her lunch bag. "It is all right." Evelyn looked at her. "No, it is not." Grace walked past Adrian and stopped several feet from the child. She did not touch her. "I told you I would not disappear without saying goodbye." Evelyn's face tightened. Grace looked once at Adrian before turning back to her. "You keep asking why everyone leaves her," Grace said quietly. "Maybe you should ask why she expects them to." Grace left the castle just before midnight with her lunch bag pressed beneath one arm and the cold rain gathering on the shoulders of her coat. No carriage waited for her. No servant followed. By the time she reached the small apartment she shared with Noah, the city streets were nearly empty, washed silver beneath the streetlights. She stood outside the front door for a moment before going in, breathing slowly until the tightness in her chest eased. Inside, a lamp still glowed above the kitchen table. Noah was asleep on the couch beneath a faded blue blanket, one sock missing, a school workbook open beside him. Grace smiled despite herself. She set down her bag, covered his exposed foot, and carried the workbook to the table. A handwritten note was tucked between the pages. "Mom, do not forget you promised pancakes Saturday." Grace pressed her lips together. Rent, winter boots, the clinic bill, now unemployment. The numbers lined up in her mind like closed doors. She sat at the kitchen table and pulled Evelyn's drawing from her lunch bag. 2 small figures. One child, one woman with a mop. No faceless crowd around them. Grace stared at it until her vision blurred. She had done the right thing. She believed that. But doing the right thing did not always pay the electric bill. "Mom." Noah's sleepy voice came from behind her. Grace quickly wiped beneath one eye and turned. "You should be in bed." He shuffled closer, hair pointing in every direction. "You should be at work." Grace looked down at the drawing. Noah noticed. "Did something happen?" She hesitated. "I lost the job." He was quiet for several seconds. "Was it because you helped somebody again?" Grace looked at him. "Why would you ask that?" Noah shrugged. "Because that is usually when you get in trouble." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. He climbed into the chair across from her. Grace told him only enough. A lonely girl. A frightened household. A father who believed rules could protect his child from everything. Noah listened seriously. Are you going back? He asked. I was fired. That was not my question. Grace looked toward the dark window. Across town, the castle had become quieter than it had been in years. Evelyn had not cried after Grace left. She had not shouted. She had not broken anything. She had simply walked back to the northern room, placed the music box on the floor, and closed the door. By morning, she had stopped answering everyone. Adrian stood outside with breakfast growing cold on a silver tray. Evelyn. Nothing. He tried again. Please open the door. Silence. The attendants exchanged nervous glances behind him. Hours passed. The stillness spread through the castle until even the servants lowered their voices. Adrian ordered the specialists contacted. Evelyn ignored them. He brought her favorite books. Untouched. Her music box remained silent. That evening, Mrs. Bennet found 4 words written on a piece of paper pushed beneath the bedroom door. She carried it directly to Adrian's study. He unfolded it beneath the yellow desk lamp. Bring the quiet woman. Adrian read the words twice, then a third time. For the first time, the king who could command an entire household understood that authority had reached the one door it could not open. Back in the apartment, Grace turned Evelyn's drawing over in her hands. Noah leaned against her shoulder. You miss her, he said. Grace looked at the tiny figure in the center of the page. I am worried about her. Noah nodded as if there were no difference. Then, just after sunrise, 3 quiet knocks sounded at the apartment door. Grace opened the door expecting Mrs. Bennet. Instead, King Adrian Vale stood in the narrow hallway outside her apartment, alone. No guards. No driver waiting behind him. No black coat marked with the crest of his house. Just a tired man in a dark suit who looked strangely out of place beneath a flickering ceiling light and beside a neighbor's bicycle chained to the railing. Noah appeared behind Grace, still wearing his pajamas. Adrian glanced at him, then back at her. Evelyn asked for you. Grace said nothing. Adrian continued. She has not spoken to anyone since you left. She spoke to you. 4 words. That still counts. Something in his face tightened, but he did not argue. Grace folded her arms. Why are you here? Adrian looked past her toward the small kitchen, the unpaid bills stacked neatly beneath a ceramic bowl, the winter coat hanging beside the door, the drawing on the table. His eyes returned to Grace. Because I need you to come back. She gave a quiet breath that was almost a laugh. You fired me. I was wrong. Noah looked up at his mother. Grace did not move. Wrong about what? Adrian hesitated. It was the first time she had seen him search for words. About you. About what you were doing. About what she needed. Grace studied him carefully. That is not enough. His expression shifted. What do you mean? I am not coming back, so you can use me to calm her down until she becomes easier for everyone else. Adrian's jaw tightened. I am trying to help my daughter. Then stop treating her like a problem that embarrasses you. Silence filled the doorway. Noah lowered his eyes. Adrian stared at Grace with the stunned stillness of a man who had never heard anyone speak to him that way and could not dismiss it because part of him already knew it was true. You do not understand the responsibility I carry, he said. Grace nodded. You are right. I do not. She stepped closer to the doorway. But I understand what it feels like when a child starts believing love depends on how easy they are to handle. Adrian looked away. The hallway light buzzed softly above them. My wife died 3 years ago, he said at last. After that, Evelyn's sensitivity became stronger. Every room overwhelmed her. Every gathering ended badly. I thought structure would help. Specialists. Rules. Distance. His voice lowered. I thought if I controlled everything around her, eventually she would feel safe. Grace looked at him for a long moment. And did she? Adrian did not answer. He did not have to. Noah stepped forward and gently tugged at Grace's sleeve. Mom. She looked down. You should go. Grace frowned. Noah. You told me scared kids need one person who does not leave when things get weird. Adrian looked at the boy. Grace closed her eyes briefly. I also told you not to repeat everything I say. You say a lot of useful things. Despite herself, Grace almost smiled. She turned back to Adrian. I will come back on conditions. He nodded immediately. Name them. No more forcing people into her room. No more talking about her where she can hear you. No one calls her unstable. And if I say she needs space, everyone gives it to her. Including you. Adrian held her gaze. Anything else? Yes. Grace picked up Evelyn's drawing from the table. You listen before you decide. He looked at the paper, then at her. After a long pause, he nodded. Agreed. Grace grabbed her coat. Noah handed her the folded drawing. 20 minutes later, she walked back through the castle doors. The northern hallway was silent when she arrived. Grace approached Evelyn's room alone and sat on the floor 5 feet from the door. She placed the drawing beside her. I came back. Nothing happened at first. Then the lock clicked. The door opened slowly. Evelyn stood in the darkness, holding the silent music box against her chest. She looked past Grace, checking the empty hallway. Did he make you come? She whispered. Grace shook her head. No. Evelyn's eyes filled with uncertainty. Then why are you here? Grace leaned back against the wall. Because I chose to be. The child stared at her for several seconds. Then she stepped into the hallway, crossed the 5 feet between them, and sat down beside Grace. For the first hour, Grace did nothing except sit beside Evelyn in the hallway. No questions. No instructions. No careful adult voice pretending everything was fine. The music box rested between them, silent now, while pale morning light stretched across the stone floor from the tall windows at the end of the corridor. Evelyn leaned against the wall with her knees drawn close, listening to the castle wake below them. Doors opening, shoes crossing marble, servants whispering. Somewhere far downstairs, a bell rang once. Evelyn flinched. Grace noticed. Too loud, she asked. Evelyn shook her head. Not the sound. Grace waited. The people. The answer came so quietly that Grace almost missed it. Evelyn pressed both hands against her sleeves. They are afraid because he is angry. Grace looked toward the staircase. Your father? Evelyn nodded. When he is worried, everyone becomes worried. When he is angry, they become scared. Then I hear all of them at once. Grace felt a cold understanding settle into place. The castle itself was not overwhelming Evelyn. The emotions inside it were. Hundreds of people moving carefully, speaking softly, measuring every word around a king they feared disappointing. Every servant who entered Evelyn's room carried that fear with them. Every specialist came desperate to succeed. Every caregiver arrived already imagining failure. And Evelyn felt all of it before anyone even spoke. Grace stood slowly. Can you show me? Evelyn looked up. Show you what? Where it gets worst. The girl hesitated, then led her through the northern wing. The closer they moved toward the central staircase, the more Evelyn's breathing changed. A pair of servants passed carrying linens. Both bowed quickly when they saw Adrian approaching from the opposite end of the hall. Their shoulders stiffened. Their emotions sharpened. Evelyn stopped walking. Grace saw it immediately. Adrian did too. What is wrong? He asked. Evelyn looked down. Nothing. Grace turned to him. Do not ask her that right now. His expression tightened out of habit, but he remembered his promise and stayed silent. Grace looked at the servants. You can go. They hurried away. Evelyn's shoulders lowered slightly. Grace watched Adrian's face. Walk with us, she said. But do not give anyone orders. He frowned. Why? Because I need you to see something. They moved through the castle together. Every corridor told the same story. When Adrian appeared, conversations stopped. Backs straightened. Hands became careful. Fear traveled ahead of him like an invisible announcement. Evelyn absorbed every bit of it. By the time they reached the main hall, she had gone pale. Grace stopped. Enough. Adrian looked at his daughter, then at the staff frozen along the edges of the room. For the first time, he seemed to see the atmosphere he created rather than the obedience it produced. Grace lowered her voice. She is not reacting to the castle. She is reacting to what everyone feels inside it. Adrian's eyes shifted toward Evelyn. Because of me. Grace did not soften the truth. Partly. The word landed harder than accusation. Adrian looked around the hall again. A dozen people avoided his gaze. He had spent years believing strict control would make his home safer. Instead, his fear had become everyone else's fear, and everyone else's fear had become his daughter's burden. Evelyn reached for Grace's hand, not Adrian's. He noticed. Something in his face broke open quietly. Not anger. Shame. Grace looked at him. If you want her to breathe easier, this place has to breathe easier first. Adrian stood beneath the high ceiling, surrounded by the order he had built, and finally understood that the most dangerous thing in his home had never been his daughter's sensitivity. It was the fear everyone had learned to carry for him. The next morning, Adrian did something no one in the castle expected. He changed the schedule. The morning briefing was canceled. The formal breakfast was reduced to 3 people. Half the attendants assigned to the northern wing were reassigned elsewhere. Most surprising of all, he asked the staff to stop announcing his arrival before he entered a room. At first, the changes created more anxiety than relief. People whispered in corners. Supervisors checked and rechecked written instructions. Grace watched from the edge of the main hall as Adrian crossed the floor without his usual escort. He looked uncomfortable without the machinery of authority around him. That was probably the point. Evelyn stood beside Grace, holding the music box against her chest. Her eyes followed her father carefully. "He is trying," Grace said. Evelyn looked up. "He is scared." Grace nodded. People usually are when they change something they have depended on for a long time. Adrian approached them and stopped several feet away. He did not ask Evelyn to come closer. He did not tell her they needed to talk. He simply looked at Grace. "What do I do?" The question seemed to surprise even him. Grace glanced toward Evelyn. "Nothing yet." Adrian almost frowned, then caught himself. Grace pointed toward the floor beside the window. "Sit." The king stared at her. "On the floor?" "You wanted to know what to do." For a second, Grace expected him to refuse. Instead, Adrian removed his coat, folded it over a chair, and lowered himself onto the stone floor. 5 feet from Evelyn. Exactly where Grace had sat the first night. No throne. No desk. No one standing behind him waiting for orders. Just a father trying not to make the wrong move. Evelyn remained still. Adrian looked at his hands. "I thought rules would make everything easier," he said. "For you. For everyone." Evelyn said nothing. "I thought if I could control the rooms, the people, the noise, then maybe you would not feel so much." His voice became quieter. "I did not understand that I was adding to it." Grace watched Evelyn's face. The girl was listening, but not only to the words. She was feeling the fear underneath them, the regret, the uncertainty. Adrian lifted his eyes. "I am sorry." The room stayed silent. Somewhere outside, wind moved softly through bare branches. Evelyn shifted one step closer, then stopped. Adrian did not move. Another step. Grace held her breath without meaning to. Evelyn finally sat on the floor across from him, still 5 feet away. Adrian's face changed, but he did not smile too quickly. "You are still loud," Evelyn said. Grace almost laughed. Adrian looked confused. "I am not speaking. Not with your voice." He understood. Slowly. "I do not know how to stop being afraid." Evelyn looked down at the music box. "Neither do I." Adrian swallowed. Then, for the first time, they sat inside the same silence without one of them trying to control it. Grace stepped backward toward the door. Adrian noticed. "Where are you going?" "To let you both practice." He looked almost alarmed. Grace gave him a small nod. "I will be right outside." She closed the door only halfway. Through the opening, she could still see them sitting on the floor, separated by 5 feet of space that suddenly felt smaller than it had before. After several quiet minutes, the music box began to play. Adrian did not reach for Evelyn. Evelyn did not move closer, but neither of them left. And for that morning, it was enough. The crisis began 3 days later, just after sunset, when 6 members of the Royal Council arrived without warning. Grace knew something was wrong before anyone spoke. The castle changed the moment their cars reached the front drive. Servants moved faster. Doors closed more carefully. Voices dropped to whispers. Evelyn felt it too. She was sitting at the long kitchen table beside Grace, drawing small circles around the edge of a piece of paper, when her hand stopped. "They are afraid again," she said. Grace looked toward the doorway. "Yes." "Because of me?" Grace answered carefully. "Because they do not understand what is happening." Evelyn lowered her eyes. "That means yes." Before Grace could respond, Mrs. Bennet appeared and asked her to come to the council room. Evelyn immediately stood. "No." Grace turned to her. "I am not leaving the castle." "That is not what I mean." The fear in the girl's voice was quiet, but unmistakable. Grace crouched so they were eye level. "I will come back." Evelyn searched her face for several seconds, then nodded. In the council room, Adrian stood at the head of a long table while 6 men and women argued in low, controlled voices. They stopped when Grace entered. One of them, an older man with silver hair, looked at her uniform before looking at her face. "This is the woman?" Adrian's expression hardened. "Her name is Grace Miller." The man barely acknowledged the correction. "The situation has become unacceptable. Word is spreading that the heir cannot appear in public." Foreign houses are asking questions. Staff members are talking. The safest solution is temporary relocation. Grace felt her stomach tighten. Relocation where? A woman across the table answered. A private estate in Vermont. Quiet. Secure. Properly staffed. Grace looked at Adrian. Does Evelyn know? No, he said. Because she is not going, Grace replied. Several council members exchanged looks. The silver-haired man leaned forward. You do not understand what is at stake. Grace looked at him. I understand exactly what is at stake. You are trying to hide a child because her pain is inconvenient to your reputation. The room went silent. Adrian did not interrupt. The man opened a leather folder and slid a document across the table. No one is asking you to remain involved. There is a financial settlement available. Enough to provide for you and your son comfortably for many years. Grace stared at the number. For one dangerous second, every unpaid bill in her apartment came back to her. Noah's winter boots. The clinic balance. The cracked kitchen window she had covered with tape. The amount on the page could erase all of it. She touched the edge of the document, then slowly pushed it back. No. The man frowned. You should think carefully. I have. This is more money than you are likely to earn in your lifetime. Grace looked directly at him. Then you should understand how serious I am. Adrian's eyes moved to her. She continued. Evelyn is not a scandal to manage. She is not a weakness to move out of sight. And I am not going to be paid to help adults pretend she was the problem. The council room became so quiet that Grace could hear the old radiator clicking near the wall. Then a small voice came from the open doorway. Grace. Everyone turned. Evelyn stood there, pale and still. Her eyes moved from the document to the council members, then to her father. She had heard enough. Grace walked toward her slowly. Evelyn looked up. Were they sending me away? Grace did not lie. They were discussing it. And you said no? Grace nodded. Evelyn's eyes filled, but she did not cry. Why? Grace reached out only after Evelyn lifted her hand first. Because you are not something people get to hide when they are uncomfortable. Adrian lowered his eyes. Around the table, no one spoke. Evelyn took Grace's hand. And for the first time, the council understood that the woman in the janitor's uniform had refused the one thing they had always believed could buy silence. The council meeting ended without a decision, but the fear did not leave with the council members. It settled into the castle instead, quieter and heavier than before. By midnight, servants were whispering again. By morning, letters had arrived from 3 allied houses asking whether Evelyn was fit to remain the public heir. Adrian read every one in silence. He stood alone in his office with the curtains open to a gray sky, one hand resting on a stack of sealed correspondence, the other pressed flat against the desk. Grace found him there an hour later. He had not changed clothes. He had not eaten. The room felt tight with the kind of pressure Evelyn had spent years trying to escape. You need to step away from this, Grace said. Adrian did not look up. I cannot. You can. I am the king. Grace leaned against the doorway. That is exactly the problem. His eyes lifted. Do you think I do not know what they are saying? His voice was controlled, but barely. Weak bloodline. Unstable heir. A ruler distracted by his own household. Every decision I make now becomes evidence that I have lost control. Grace watched him carefully. And what happens if you keep proving them right by pretending you never feel anything? Adrian looked away. The silence stretched. You do not understand, he said. I was raised to believe hesitation invited chaos. My father never apologized. He never explained himself. People obeyed him because they were afraid not to. And did you love him? Adrian froze. Grace did not soften the question. Did Evelyn love the version of you that acted like him? He closed his eyes. For the first time since Grace had known him, he looked less like a king than a tired father standing beneath something too heavy to carry alone. I do not know how to be weak in front of them, he whispered. Then stop calling honesty weakness. A sound came from the doorway behind Grace. Evelyn stood there with the music box in both hands. Adrian straightened immediately, the old instinct returning. Evelyn, you should not be here. She looked at him. You are loud again. Adrian's shoulders fell. I know. Grace stepped aside. Evelyn walked into the room slowly. She did not ask what was wrong. She did not tell him everything would be fine. She simply crossed the carpet and sat on the floor beside his desk. Adrian stared at her. What are you doing? Evelyn looked down at the music box. Nothing yet. Grace felt her chest tighten. Adrian did too. The words were his daughter's. But the lesson came from somewhere familiar. He lowered himself carefully to the floor across from her. Not as a king, not as a ruler trying to solve a crisis, just a father. Evelyn turned the small key beneath the music box. The melody began, soft and imperfect. Adrian covered his face with one hand. Evelyn did not move closer. She only stayed. After a long moment, he lowered his hand. "I am afraid I will fail you," he said. Evelyn looked at him. "I was afraid you would never tell me." His breath caught. Grace remained near the door, silent. Outside the office, several council members had returned and now stood in the hall, waiting to demand another answer. None of them spoke. Through the open doorway, they watched the vampire king sit on the floor beside his daughter, no throne beneath him, no command in his voice, no armor left in his posture. Evelyn placed the music box between them. "Being scared is not the same as being dangerous," she said. Adrian looked at her, then toward Grace. The echo of those words filled the room more deeply than any order he had ever given. He reached for Evelyn's hand only after she reached first. And in that quiet moment, the daughter everyone had tried to fix became the one teaching her father how to stay. 3 months later, the northern wing no longer felt like a place people avoided. The doors stayed open during the day. The heavy curtains were pulled back from the windows. The long hallway that once carried whispers now held the sound of children turning pages, wooden puzzle pieces tapping against tables, and the occasional uneven melody of Evelyn's repaired music box. Grace still arrived early, but she no longer wore the gray janitorial uniform. Adrian had offered her money, a private house, and a title she did not want. She accepted none of them. Instead, she asked for something practical. A small program inside the castle for children who struggled with overwhelming emotions, unusual sensitivities, grief, or simply the exhausting pressure of being expected to behave like everyone else. Adrian agreed. More importantly, he listened when Grace told him how it should work. No locked rooms. No labels spoken where children could hear them. No rewards for pretending to be comfortable. Parents were allowed to sit on the floor. Caregivers were taught to wait before asking questions. Some days were still difficult. Evelyn still needed quiet after crowded dinners. She still sensed fear before anyone admitted feeling it. Adrian still became too controlled when responsibility frightened him. But now, when the castle grew tense, people noticed. They breathed. They spoke honestly. They stopped pretending silence meant peace. Grace returned home to Noah every evening, just as she had promised. Sometimes he came with her after school, carrying a backpack full of books and snacks he insisted tasted better when shared. Evelyn liked him immediately because he treated her sensitivity as neither frightening nor impressive. He argued with her about chess. She corrected his terrible handwriting. Neither of them seemed interested in the fact that one was the heir to an ancient vampire house, and the other still forgot where he left his shoes. One winter afternoon, Grace found them sitting together in Evelyn's room beneath the wide windows, reading from the same adventure book while the first snow covered the gardens outside. The bedroom door stood completely open. No attendants waited nearby. No one listened nervously from the hall. Grace stopped at the threshold. Adrian approached quietly and stood beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Inside the room, Noah turned a page too quickly. Evelyn pulled the book back and told him he had skipped an entire paragraph. He denied it. She pointed directly to the missing section. Grace smiled. Adrian watched his daughter laugh. It was not a dramatic sound. It did not echo through the castle or announce that everything had been healed. It was simply a child's laugh, easy and unguarded. Adrian looked at Grace. Was she ever broken? He asked. Grace kept her eyes on Evelyn. No. Adrian waited. Grace folded her arms gently. She was surrounded by people who were too loud to hear her. He lowered his gaze, accepting the truth without defending the past. From inside the room, Evelyn looked toward them. Are you both going to stand there all day? Noah added. We need someone to settle an argument. Grace raised an eyebrow. About what? He thinks he won, Evelyn said. I did win, Noah protested. Adrian glanced at Grace. This sounds serious. Grace stepped into the room first. Adrian followed. Evelyn moved over to make space. Outside, snow continued falling in slow white layers across the castle grounds. Behind them, the northern door remained open.